All right, we are recording. And so I always forget to ask before I hit record too. How do you pronounce your last name? Is it Tayal?
Tayan. Tayan.
Tayan?
Tayan. Yeah.
Okay, Tayan. I don't know, I was thinking Tayal. All right, cool. Yeah, I always forget to ask before I hit the record button. I'm like, how do they pronounce the last name?
That's funny.
All right, cool. So I have Diana on the podcast, and thanks for coming on. It looks like you froze up a little bit. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, all right, there you go. All right, cool. So I just want to say thanks for coming on. Let me set this up. Yeah, so in honor of next month, April, which is going to be Cesarean Awareness Month, just wanted to have you come on and kind of talk about your experience, the work that you do. I know you have a great VBAC story, and I didn't even know what VBAC meant until just a short period ago. I'd asked my wife, I'm like, what does VBAC mean? So she kind of explained it to me, and I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. So I just wanted to kind of get you on just to kind of share what you do, get a little bit of your backstory, and just kind of help demystify some of the fears and misconceptions about going the whole medical route to give birth, and just how home birthing is more natural and probably safer for women. Maybe, I don't know, you can explain on that, but just want to say thanks for coming on. Give me a few minutes of your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. So in the work that I do now, I work with women primarily who have had a traumatic childbirth experience. And a large portion of those women are people that have had a C-section. Not everybody has had a traumatic C-section, but usually that's a huge amount of like what I do. And I guess I can start off by just sort of explaining how I got into this work, which was really after the birth of my first child. My first child was a planned home birth that we made the decision to transfer to the hospital after a really long labor. And what happened at the hospital was this massive cascade of interventions, very little consent to like anything that happened to us was received, just things were just done to us. And and I kind of knew like that's kind of the part of what happens when you go to a hospital to have a baby. You know, you sign a form at the beginning that says they can kind of do anything they want to you to, you know, if it's deemed to protect the baby. And I knew that going into it, and I don't say this to villainize the hospital, but that was the truth of that experience. It was really a tough one that ended in a C-section. And it was traumatic, and it really deeply affected me. And I know this isn't everybody's experience of having a C-section or even an emergency one, but I definitely had postpartum depression, PTSD, just a lot of really heavy, hard stuff after that birth. And I wasn't planning on having another baby because of how difficult that experience was. But I ended up pregnant 2 years later. And I knew that I had to find a way to birth outside of the medical system because the way that most hospitals and medical providers work is that there's not a lot of support for VBAC, which is a term you used at the beginning, and I'll explain it. It's vaginal birth after a C-section. There's like wide variances in how well they're supported. So I'll just give the example in my state. You are allowed to try to have a vaginal birth after a C-section in a hospital with certain providers. Many of them are, I would say, tolerant, but not necessarily really supportive of a vaginal birth after a C-section. Even though their governing body, which is ACOG, says that it's medically appropriate to allow women to try to have one, many care providers don't actually do that in practice. It takes a long time for like the policy to come down and like actually be implemented. So,
but what's the reasoning behind that though? What's the reasoning to have a second child be a cesarean section again? Because for my wife's, for her instance, just the way that the first C-section went, her uterus, the way they had to cut it, they were afraid the second time around would rupture her uterus. So they, right out the bat, you know, if you have a second kid, it's going to be cesarean. So that's the route we went. So is it, what's the reasoning behind that usually?
There isn't good reasoning behind it. I mean, in your wife's case, I'm guessing she had a transverse cut, which is a wider, it's like a lengthwise cut as opposed to like a horizontal cut. That is a little bit more risky. Most C-sections are not done that way, but there isn't really a good reason. It's more like, this is the way we've always done it, so we're going to continue doing it this way.
All right.
My mother's generation, it was once a C-section, always a C-section. That's the rule. And we now, in the year 2019, have so much data that shows that just off the bat, having another repeat surgical birth isn't safer. It's actually safer to have a vaginal birth, all things being equal, you know.
Right.
So, you know, again, I think it's mostly tradition. It's mostly people have fear around it. People, you know, there's this term that's really scary, like uterine rupture. You just picture like a uterus exploding, and that's terrifying, right? You know, I don't scare anybody. But there isn't a good medical reason to not allow women to VBAC. There just isn't. Midwives where I live aren't allowed to attend vaginal births after a C-section at home. So, you know, as I was thinking about my second birth, I had very little options. Like, my option was just, I could go back to a hospital. I could hopefully find someone who would support me. And that felt like too big of a risk. And I also have always been just sort of really interested in birth and learning a lot about it and understanding the way that physiological birth works. And I just knew that I'd be safer at home. I just knew that I would be. I knew, I also had a lot of like a strong intuition going into that too. That, I would be safer there. And that if I went to a hospital, I would be getting another C-section. So I ended up finding a way to birth at home outside of the medical system. I found a trained midwife who was willing to attend me outside of the scope of her license, because the licensing laws in our state say that she wouldn't be able to attend me at home. So that's the basic story. It was a beautiful, amazing, powerful, wonderful experience. And after I had my last son, I just thought, like, I have to tell people about this. I mean, I mean, so many women in our culture, and we're both in the United States, have C-sections. I mean, I don't know how many of your friends and family, but I would say at least half of all the women that I know that have had children have probably had one. And so understanding that you can have a better experience the next time, or hearing inspirational VBAC stories, or supporting people through traumatic feelings that they may have, just felt really big to me and really significant to me. And because I had that birth that was kind of slightly illegal and definitely outside of the mainstream medical system, I got very involved and connected with other women who do the same thing. They birth at home, they birth unassisted, and it's called free birth. And women do it for a lot of different reasons and come to it in many different ways. But that's the community that I connected with after that birth. And I've shared my story a whole bunch of times, and I run a support group now for women who have experienced a traumatic birth, and we talk about all of these issues. And it's just been, it's amazing the journeys our kids take us on, right? You know, it's so cool.
So what was your initial inclination to birth at home? Are you like a real granola hippie kind of person? Was that, okay.
Oh yeah, totally. And also, like, you know, I'm going to say something that might sound a little bit controversial, but I've never seen birth as a medical event. It's a physiological event that female bodies do. Most of us do it, right? And it's not actually something that needs to be medically managed unless there's a physical problem. So I just didn't see the point. I also didn't really see the point of having a trained surgeon attend a birth. Like, unless you need surgery, I don't see why a surgeon should attend your birth. And you know, what we see has happened is exactly what you would expect that would happen, is that more and more women are getting surgery that don't need it. But I will absolutely cop to being a huge hippie. Totally,
Oh yeah, I mean, because we're nothing but, you know, primates wearing clothes, or monkeys playing dress up. We're no different than animals in nature, and they give birth out in the wild all the time, unassisted, and everything's fine. So why we think that we have to, like you said, there's a medical emergency, yeah, it should just be done naturally. You don't need all this assistance and all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
and I think it really takes away from, we get in this too about, doing the C-section cesarean in a hospital environment really takes away, I think, a maternal instinct that would naturally occur if you were giving birth at home, on your own. And just that clinical setting, everything's so, sterilized, and just the environment and just the way, your baby's handed to you around a curtain, just it's very, very disconnected. And I think that's maybe a lot of psychological issues for both parties involved. So
It really does. I think that's
yeah.
really insightful. And one thing that I hear a lot from women that have experienced both a natural birth and a C-section is that they grieve for that connection that they lost.
Yeah.
Like they always talk about, they don't even talk about the surgery or like physical pain or recovery. They always talk about grieving those moments that they lost with their baby when they were, in the OR and on drugs and getting stitched up and all of those things. So
Yeah.
that's a really insightful thing that you just said.
Yeah. I think that's pretty huge. And just coming from, just from a guy's standpoint too, being involved in that whole process with my wife, she was in labor for like over 20 hours or a day or something. So super long labor. And so last minute, her vitals are starting to decline or what have you. I should know all this. My wife's going to kill me if she listens to this. But, it turned out to be an emergency C-section. And so last minute, they rushed her off to go. And now I'm left sitting alone in a cold, dark hallway by myself, not knowing what's going on. I'm crying. I don't know what's happening. So
Yeah.
it's emotional for the guy too. And that doesn't really get talked about too much, but it's not supposed to be a pity party for us, but yeah, just the way that whole process unfolds, it's really strange and kind of bizarre. And
Yeah. I imagine that must have been terrifying for you.
Yeah, because you don't know what's going on, and a major surgery is about to take place, and it's already an emotionally charged moment, and then now your wife's gone, and yeah, it's just it's kind of bizarre. But I forgot the point I was gonna make, but just the way the whole process is done, it's just that maternal instinct's not really there. And my wife went through depression afterwards, postpartum depression. Didn't really want to have anything to do with our first child. I think because it's part of that disconnect, I think,
Right. Yeah, we're designed, when babies are born without synthetic drugs in our system, mothers are flooded with the largest dose of oxytocin we will ever see in our entire lives.
Right.
Oxytocin is the orgasm hormone, the orgasm chemical. It's the chemical that bonds us to people. And that is meant to bond us to our kids so deeply and fiercely. And we absolutely miss out on that when we give birth surgically. And I do want to say for anyone listening, Chris and I are not demonizing C-sections. Like, they absolutely save lives. Right. And I'm grateful that they exist and that they're here to help people in a true emergency. But I think what we're wanting to speak to today is the fact that part of this conversation also has to be that they're so overused.
Oh, yeah. I was just doing some reading. It's like, it used to be like 1 in 20 back in the 60s. Now today it's like 1 in 3 are cesarean. Like you're saying, it's just part of tradition now. It's just kind of accepted, and you don't really think twice about it. You're like, oh, that's what the doctor says, so I guess I should do it. So kind of takes the power away from the woman to make the choice of, wait, do I really want to do this? Is something I need to do? Again, if it's for an emergency purposes, then yeah, of course. But they're advising people just to do it without even trying vaginal first. Is that what's going on, or is there?
You mean if someone had a primary C-section?
Yeah.
Yeah, that varies by region. There are places in the United States where hospitals have just complete VBAC bans. So like they don't ever do it. It's always on an automatic repeat C-section.
Yeah.
That is changing slowly, which is really good. But to answer your question, yes, that still does happen today. Yeah. And we have really terrible maternal death outcomes in the US. And I think this is a really big part of it. And it's a huge reason why so many people like myself and a lot of the women that I work with just decide they want to not birth in the medical system because it ceased to serve us very well for the most part.
Yeah. Now, I was reading something, maybe you can elaborate on this if it's true or not. Like the rise, I think, in cesarean is also due because of women's overall health, and there's a rise in obesity. So maybe being more obese makes it difficult for vaginal birth. I'm not sure, but I saw that somewhere that might be a contributing factor to why cesareans are more prominent today.
I know of absolutely no actual research that says that obese women can't birth vaginally.
Okay.
This is purely my opinion, and I could be wrong. That feels to me like kind of an excuse. Like it kind of feels to me like blaming women for
Right.
what's happening. And it feels a little bit distasteful to me, but I know tons of women who are obese and overweight and had uncomplicated births. I think that another part of this issue is that they're treated very differently within the medical system. We know that people that are obese and overweight are stigmatized. There's medical bias against them. And there might also be some legitimate health concerns. There's probably, for example, an increased risk of gestational diabetes. That's probably true.
Right.
Some other complications, but those are things that can be managed. That doesn't mean that you can't birth your baby. I just know, like, from the women that I've talked to, they're usually told that because of their BMI, they're not as good of a VBAC candidate. And I don't see how that could be. Like, I just
yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, I didn't know if it was as dark as like a conspiracy, like maybe there's more money involved with doing cesarean sections. So maybe the hospitals profit if they can. Oh, did I hit on something? Maybe there. Yeah.
Well, I think that that's something to consider. I mean, of course, if you can bill $30,000 to an insurance company for a C-section, but you're going to bill $10,000 for a vaginal delivery, I mean, they're huge money makers.
Right.
And I don't know that I would go so far as to say it's a mass conspiracy, but
Right.
I don't think that's nothing. You know.
Yeah. So what are some of the risks for doing a cesarean birth? Are there any high risks involved with doing that? Like I know, like I've talked to someone before about, it's not really a risk, but it's just it's a compromise to the baby because during vaginal birth, when the baby passes through the vaginal wall, there's healthy bacteria that the baby will get in its eyes and its mouth that will later on in life build its immune system. So I know there's a risk factor to that, when you don't have a vaginal birth, that it compromises the immune system. Mm-hmm. Like, is there any other like health factors or risks that are involved that you can think of?
Well, I don't know where to begin. We could begin with the baby or we could begin with the mom.
Yeah.
You're totally correct that among babies that are delivered by a C-section, you have higher rates of asthma, allergies, and obesity, which is actually a really interesting one.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And we don't know this for sure, but we think that this has to do with the gut health issues, that they're all connected to gut health. And so you hit on something that's a real thing. It's another aspect of that is that babies that are born via C-section are much less likely to breastfeed. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about like what the mom's body has just gone through and how much recovery time she needs before she can actually sit up and put a baby on a breast and all of those things. And we know that breastfeeding is associated with just a massive amount of wonderful beneficial things for children and babies. So, I mean, that's just with the baby. For mom, it's major surgery, and it comes with any other of the major risks that you have with the surgery, like infection, hemorrhaging. And so all of those same things apply. Additionally, having a C-section affects your future fertility, and it affects your options if you want to have another baby. So like I talked about at the beginning, if you've had a prior cesarean, you're going to be treated differently. Your options are going to be, limited, or it's just going to be kind of harder to navigate a vaginal birth than it would be if you hadn't had that experience.
Yeah. I've had a couple chiropractors on the show as well, and they've talked about some of the dangers involved. I think this goes with vaginal as well as C-section, but just some of the pulling that they do on the baby trying to get it out. probably
Yeah.
more with the C-section, I'm not sure, but just pulling on the head and the spine. I mean, from a chiropractic point of view, I mean, nerve endings are going from our spine to different glands and organs. So you start getting that out of alignment on a newborn, they're going to run into some problems. So you got to be real careful with that. My son, my second born, they couldn't get him out. He was over 10 pounds. He was a big boy. So, but I think you got that beat though. I think you have that beat, right? Yeah. So they had trouble getting him out. And so he came out they had a plunger basically on his face. They had a plunger. So he came out, he had this big purple thing on his face because I guess they're trying to suction him out. I'm just thinking about that now, like the implications on what that's doing to his spinal alignment and just nerve damaging that you could do. So yeah, it could be tough. It could be tricky.
Yeah. And that's another really insightful thing that you said there. And, you know, a lot of people think that vaginal birth is traumatic on the baby, like pushing and wiggling its way out of a vagina is hard on their body, but actually babies are designed to do that. And in addition to the bacteria that they're getting, they're flexing their muscles in a way that prepares them for life outside of the womb. And I can only imagine what it must be like to just be in and then like suddenly out and like there not to be passage. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I think they're just from, you know, a natural point of view, it's very natural for, like you said, just the movement, the baby getting ready to come out and just thrust into the world in these bright lights. And it's got to be so traumatic. It's like, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Do you get your son chiropractic care?
No, I've never done that. No.
Oh.
He's never complained of anything, but I do know both my kids have allergies. My daughter's got skin issues, but both my kids are vaccinated. So I kind of wanted to get that's a hot topic. Something I didn't want to do. It's something me and my wife argue about. She's pro vaccination. I'm not. So where do you stand on vaccinations?
Oh boy, you're going to really make me go here.
Well, I'm just curious. I mean,
I'll talk.
I mean, I think there's some benefits to them, but the way they do the measles, mumps, rubella all in one shot, I heard that's not great. Maybe if you spread those out, it couldn't be so bad. But I've seen some of the ingredients they put in the vaccination, so I don't know. It's
a tough issue. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those issues that I try to avoid because it's like religion. You know, on either side of the fence, people are convinced that the other side is wanting to kill their babies. I mean, it's just so hotly debated, and that like really kind of grosses me out because everybody's just doing the best they can. Everybody loves their children and wants to protect their children. Yeah. So I'm coming from that place of really, I'm not judging anyone else's choices, but we don't vaccinate our kids. I have a lot of concerns about the ingredients, like you said, that are in vaccinations. And I also believe that there's so much to be said for a naturally functioning immune system. And there's so many ways that we can do that without drugs. And also just, it doesn't really make sense to me that health comes in a shot. You know, that just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me that we would be designed to have to go to a doctor and get a shot in order to be healthy. And I know that, you know, people talk about infectious diseases and how before vaccines were invented that children were dying. And a big part of that has to do with sanitation, you know? I just think that there's compelling reasons to be wary of, especially the amount of vaccines that are on the current pediatric schedule. So I said it, you made me go there.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it's like whatever they're making the vaccines out of, they're pulling chemistry and stuff out of nature to Frankenstein it. So you've already got the ingredients there out of nature. So why not just use those as herbs and botanicals? And all right, well, we don't have to go down that road.
Or just even like breastfeeding. Like breastfeeding is magic. Like it's magic for babies' immune systems. When mom comes in contact with diseases or colds or viruses, her body's immune system actually passes on that immunity through her breast milk to her children. And that's amazing. Like, wow, why not just do that? you know?
Yeah, I don't want to. Yeah, the stuff they put in formulas, I've read about that too. Like they found, metals in it, flame retardant. I mean, just the formulas on the shelves are just they're garbage. I mean, why? Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
yeah. What about circumcision? Where do you fall on that one?
It's child abuse.
Yeah, we circumcised my son, but now looking back, because this is all before I got into this healthy lifestyle, did all the
Hmm.
horrible things, but looking back now, I'm like, why did I do that? Because I don't want my son to look different than me. It's like, what's the logic behind that? I think it's just, it's horrible.
Yeah. Well, we just do better when we know better. All of us make mistakes. So,
Yeah, yeah. So going back to your story a little bit, so your first was cesarean, and then your second one you delivered at home. It was a home birth. So comparing the two births night and day, I mean, it must have been huge, right? Huge.
oh, absolutely night and day. I mean, my first son's birth was interesting because it was the first time you become a mother, right? So I had all of this joy because he was here, but also all of this pain and all of this like shattering of his birth experience. It was really like a spiritual shattering.
Yeah, yeah.
And when Rama, my second son, was born, it was like I had come full circle and like I had come back to my soul almost.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was a beautiful, fast, easy birth. I gave birth to him in my bed, probably like the exact place where he was conceived, which I just think is so sweet and beautiful. And, nobody took him from me. Nobody touched him. I can remember I start crying when I think about this, but he just like looked right up into my eyes. He wasn't anesthetized or drugged. He was just so alert and so present. And it was just so healing. And anytime I hear about moms having home births after C-section, it like makes me very emotional because I know what a incredibly beautiful healing experience that is. It's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine as a guy, but I can just speak for myself that I personally felt I felt kind of robbed that I get to experience. I'm sure my wife did too. A vaginal birth. You get to miss that whole process of the baby coming into the world and get to have that experience with your wife, with the baby.
Yeah.
I felt kind of robbed that I didn't get to have that experience. I mean, I might
Yeah.
be selfish to say that, but I felt that way. I felt like I missed out. A beautiful thing. Kind of sucks.
No, you're not selfish, and this is your child. You're part of this process. You're part of what brought this child onto the planet. So I hear you. That's totally valid. I felt that way too.
Oh yeah, yeah, I bet.
Wow.
Yeah. Um, how does one go about picking a midwife and a doula? Like, how'd you pick yours out?
Mm, great question. To be totally honest with you, the first time I just picked someone who was really close by to me because I really didn't know much. I was, first pregnancy,
Yeah.
young, the pregnancy was unplanned. I knew I wanted to have a home birth and I knew I wanted a midwife because that model of care spoke to me
Mm.
at the time. So I honestly just picked someone who was close to me. Now, the way that I would answer that question that you pose would be it depends on what you want. So it depends on what kind of a doula or a midwife you want. I think it's really important that you find someone that you personally click with really well.
Right.
But so for me, for example, autonomy is very important to me, and I don't want to be bullied into certain, maybe bully is too strong a word, but coerced or made to do certain tests that I might not want to do or have like cookie cutter care. It's really important to me when I hire a healthcare provider that I have a voice in my own care. So I have a bunch of questions that I would ask a midwife, like, what happens if I pass 42 weeks? How do you feel about women who free birth? That's a really great question to ask a midwife because that'll tell you a lot about how they determine risk and how committed they are to female autonomy in the birthing process. But that's just what's important to me. Someone else who's picking out a midwife or a doula might have a totally different set of what they're looking for or standards. So figure out what those things are, and then find someone who you click with.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Somebody who resonates with you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, so when you choose that option to do a home birth, so are you still going to your general practitioner for checkups, doing all that stuff, doing
Um, it varies. Are you asking me specifically, or just people
Yeah,
who home
yeah, I
birth?
guess just you specifically. Did you do that?
I never went to a general practitioner for any sort of tests or monitoring. The birth keeper that served me did things like she would do fundal height measurements, where they measure your belly to measure that it's growing. And we checked our blood pressure. What else did we do? I don't think we did any blood tests. Just like very basic, simple prenatal care. I think that's probably pretty typical for most women that home birth, is that the person who is attending them at home will do prenatal care for them. And that can look like blood and urine tests. That can look like ultrasounds. They can order an ultrasound for you if you want that.
All right.
Or it can look really, really simple, like what I had. And it just kind of depends on how you determine your own risk, what you want. Some people really don't want an ultrasound. Some people like that. They want to see the baby, and it makes them feel safe to see like 10 fingers and 10 toes. So it can look a lot of different ways. For me, it was very simple. And, I had really easy, healthy pregnancies. So I didn't really need a high degree of care or prenatal care.
So you don't really need to keep in contact with them, like, hey, I'm supposedly going to be having the baby on this due date, but after the baby's born, I'm going to come in and get some checkups. Like, how does that work when you take the baby in for the first time for a checkup? Like, well, why, is there a lot of questions? Are they up to speed with what you're doing, or how does that work?
Yeah. So you're talking about like the pediatrician visit after?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I never got any questions about it. I just said I gave birth at home. And I think, I'm trying to remember, I think that the pediatrician that we picked, we had told her that we had like met her beforehand, and and she was also an ND, not an MD. So NDs tend to be a little bit more on the spectrum of more holistic and less interventions, I suppose. But I think I can speak to part of what you're asking about. Really is like, okay, you have the baby, then what? Does anybody check on you? Does anyone, take the baby anywhere? And what usually happens is there's a 1-day postpartum visit with a home birth midwife, and then they'll come again at 3 days, and then they'll come again at like 2 weeks, and then they'll come again at 6 weeks. And 6 weeks constitutes your completion of care. You're like done with that part of your pregnancy care. So it's really wonderful. Like, you don't have to go anywhere. They come to you, they look at the baby, they ask you about breastfeeding. If you have any questions or concerns, like all first-time moms do, they can talk you through it. And like anyone who's given birth, like, you don't want to leave your house. Like you're like, have like leaky boobs and you have a baby and you're not sleeping.
Right.
Like, you don't want to go. I mean, I can't even imagine. I would home birth just for that reason alone, just to be able to stay home. So that's how that looks like postnatally after the baby's born.
Yeah.
Typically.
What'd you end up doing? A water birth, or how'd you do it?
I had planned to maybe water birth. We had like a big tub that I thought I would like to be in, but as it turned out, the way that my labor just went, I didn't really like being in the water. I wanted to be kind of have more support, and I ended up just sitting kind of upright in my bed. It was really awesome. When my husband was sitting right behind me and kind of like holding me, like kind of giving me a hug, and he was born right there. It was really, really intimate, really sweet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
It's funny. Me and my wife, we can joke about it now, but for her first pregnancy, the long labor, so I was by her side, by the bedside most of the time, just standing there, just doing what I can to console her and stuff like that. And it was such a long labor. So we can joke about this now, but I remember, I didn't say this at the time, but looking back now, I'm like, man, my back was really killing me. Cause I have a bad back. I'm like, my back was killing me standing there the whole time. She's like, really? Your back hurt? I'm like, it did. My back was killing me.
Oh,
We
that's
can
so.
joke about it now, but yeah.
Yeah, don't say that to a laboring woman.
Yeah, didn't say it to him. Yeah.
So can I ask you a question? I'm just curious.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
how does your wife feel about her births? Like, do you guys ever talk about it, or does she have any feelings about the way her kids were born? Is she totally cool with it? Like, I'm just curious.
We just talked about it the other night, and she was all on board for doing obviously not the first time around. I mean, she wanted a vaginal birth, but just for the long labor, she got to a point with the labor so long, she was so exhausted. She had nothing left to give. So
Yeah.
I think that's why they kind of decided, like, because her vitals were kind of dropping a little bit. She was just pooping out. She had nothing left. So
Mm-hmm.
in that instance, it was great. But she was all on board for the second cesarean section.
Okay.
She's like, I want to get it in, get this done, let's wrap it up.
Cool.
I don't want to go through that whole painful process again. So
Yeah.
she's like, yeah, I'm all on board. She thought it was a great decision. So you can see the two different sides of the spectrum. Like, some people are like all for it, and some are like, I'm sure she'd much rather do a natural birth if she could have, but yeah, she didn't want to go through that whole process again. So she's like, yeah, let's just set a date. I'll get in, get out, boom, let's do it. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I completely understand that perspective, especially since she already knows what it's like. Like, she's been through it, and
yeah,
labor always brings an element of the unknown to it, and I can understand her perspective, not wanting to deal with that.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad that she feels. I'm glad she sounds like she feels okay about it. That's good.
Yeah, she was happy with the decisions, but there was that little bit of postpartum depression for the first child, which I think was a little tough. But yeah, she was all on board for doing it. So
good.
Yeah.
Good.
So I was gonna ask you about something, because I've heard you mention it before about the placenta and what you do with that.
Yes.
Now, did I hear correctly that's something that you eat? And what's the logic behind that, if that's what's happening? Because I've heard people do it, but I just
Yeah. So there isn't really. Yes, I did eat my placenta. There isn't a lot of like actual scientific evidence about if this does what the folklore says it does, but it is believed to help stop postpartum bleeding. So after you have the baby, prevent excessive bleeding after the baby's born, help with breastfeeding, help you have a plentiful milk supply. And also it's supposed to help with postpartum mood. So
okay.
yeah, a lot people consume it in a lot of different ways. You can turn it into little pills, you can freeze it, put it into smoothies. People who are super hardcore just like will bite off a chunk, which I'm not that hardcore at all. But yeah, it was for me personally, it was one of those things where it's like, I know it can't hurt, so why not? And I don't know if it had any of the purported benefits. I can say that I definitely didn't have excessive bleeding, had plentiful milk, and felt great after the birth where I consumed my placenta. But who's to say if that was the placenta or just the fact that I had a great birth? I don't know. But
yeah.
It sounds pretty crazy though, I know.
Well, I don't know why I think this, but I thought you're supposed to take the placenta and then bury it in the ground and plant a tree on top of it or something. I don't know why I'm thinking that.
Some people do that.
Okay.
Yeah, some people do that as a way to like honor this organ that your body grew and that nourished your baby. I think that a lot of women don't like looking at the placenta as a piece of biohazard, the way that's just like destroyed in an industrial birth setting. So I think that that's beautiful. I think burying it under a tree is a beautiful way to honor it and give it back to the earth.
Yeah. I don't know what the logic is behind eating it. Maybe it's packed full of vitamins and minerals and nutrients. I'm not sure. There's my dog going nuts. So I'm not sure I'm assuming that's what the logic is behind that, some kind of health benefits. But I have a friend, Dan McDonald, who I've interviewed a couple times, and he's an advocate for raw foods, detoxification, and he actually does free consultations for pregnant women, just to kind of give them a heads up on getting some real nutrition in the body, how to maybe detox before you get pregnant, or what you can do during pregnancy to have a healthier baby. So I thought it was kind of cool that he gives free consultations, because normally he charges, but he gives free consultations just to help people, women in that area, because today's society and just what people are eating, and you're vegan, I'm assuming plant-based, and people are super unhealthy. So if you can get a leg up on that, you're gonna have a healthier baby, probably an easier pregnancy.
Totally.
And, you know, it's probably gonna be more flexible if you're not so dehydrated, you've got proper nutrition, lymphatically speaking, if you're, you know, so many options there. But yeah, it's just great that he gives free advice. So.
Wow, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I'm going to remember that for other pregnant moms I know. That's wonderful. It's a wonderful idea to detox way before you get pregnant, I think.
Yeah, depending on your lifestyle and what you've done. So yeah, just to get cleaned up, and then yeah, it'd probably be a much easier pregnancy and less health
Totally.
concerns. Yeah, so because we know, I mean, I'm sure you probably know that, you know, the mother and baby share the same lymphatic system. So what ails the mom, she's passing on to the baby. So
Yeah.
it just makes sense to do that. So
Yeah.
well, I guess we can start wrapping this up. So expecting mothers out there or couples who are looking to conceive, and they want to get their autonomy back and take their power back and do a home delivery. I think there's a lot of fear that's put onto people to go to the hospital and give birth in the hospital setting. I mean,
Mm.
would you agree with that? Is it just kind of a little
Oh,
bit
100%. Yeah.
fear-based?
I
Yeah.
mean, our culture is so afraid of birth. We're so afraid of it, and we don't understand it. And think about this, like, most people have never seen a birth, a human birth, or attended a birth until your partner is giving birth, or you yourself are the birthing person. I mean, I'm speaking, of course, of the United States, but I mean, we just
Yeah.
don't see birth. So of course we're afraid of it. And then the media portrays it as, people screaming and,
Yeah.
oh, it's a huge emergency. And so of course people are afraid. Yeah. Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, that's for a lot of women. It's just reclaiming your power back, your autonomy back, that, you know, you can do this on your own. It's been going on since the dawn of time. So you don't need all this medical intervention and all that stuff. So I think it's just a matter of just taking your power back and, you know, knowing that you can do it at home, you know, so.
I can say it's like the most powerful thing I've ever done. And I kind of wish it for every single woman. I often say that being a mother takes so much strength. It takes so much. And when you leave your birth experience feeling powerful and like, oh, I can do this, it informs your parenting. And on the flip side, when you leave your birth experience feeling kind of broken and a little bit disrespected, or anything that could possibly happen in a traumatic birth, it's hard to find that. It's hard to find that strength that it just takes. So, I mean, I want every woman, no matter where she chooses to give birth, no matter who attends her, I want her to leave that experience feeling powerful. That's what I want.
Right. Nice. I concur. Well, I just want to say thanks for being a voice out there for women and for couples and whoever needs it, so they have an option, so they know that there's an option available to them. So I just want to say thanks for the work that you do, and for coming on the show and sharing your story. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I really appreciate you talking about this topic.
Oh,
Thank you.
awesome. Yeah. Because I've recently rebranded the podcast, changed the name and all that stuff. So I'm trying to get more of a holistic approach and not just so narrow-minded on the food aspect of things. So there's a much broader scope. So I'm trying to get on different guests and talk about different subjects. And so it's just great to have you on to kind of share some information that I don't know, an area that I don't know. So I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was so much fun. This was awesome.
All right, on. If people want to connect with you or follow you, what's the best way?
You can find me on Instagram, and you can just search for my name, Diana Forsell Tayan, with a T, and you'll find me. That's how most people find me. And I also have a website, and my website is dianaforsell.com. It's a little bit under construction right now, but I think by the time you publish this podcast, it'll be up and live. And there's information there about who I am and what I do. And if you are interested in joining my support group or having one-on-one sessions with me, there's information there about that too. So.
Okay, so you do consultations like via Skype or something, or like how you?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, on. Awesome. Sounds good.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate it.
Bye. Thank you.
All right, we are paused. All right, are we paused?